And this is one of the best secrets that I can share with you, because this is exactly how I managed to get the job. Today we're going to be talking about the steps that I took to get into property and the steps that you will need to take to get into property as well, including interview questions and other various things that you need to prepare. I want to take you through a 3-step guide of how you can get your foot through the door in the industry, starting with how to prepare before you even approach any opportunities, then how to approach opportunities and get interviews and get yourself in front of the right people, and then lastly, when you're in front of these people and you've prepared, how to close the interview and get your foot through the door ultimately to become an agent in London or in the wider areas of the United Kingdom. I have a book here in front of me that I used to prepare for this back in the day, and it's full of interview questions and research that I did, so stick around right until the end to see exactly how I landed my first position as an agent. But just before we get into that, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe. It helps me massively in the YouTube algorithm. And for those of you that send me questions on Instagram and on YouTube, we've decided to create a platform where some of these answers can be given to you. We want to create products and do events and various other things, and so I've created a website, bartcommunity.com, which is going to be in the description. I recently did an in-person event at the University of Westminster, which seemed to go quite well. I'm going to put some clips on the screen here. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, whether it's products or events, make sure you go to the website and register your interest in the registration box to not miss out on anything that we're going to be working on shortly. With that being said, let's get right into the video. So, step 1, you have to become obsessed with property and start to get to know your stuff. Before I even approached anyone to try and work in property, I made it almost an obsession of mine, and I spent probably 2 years before I made any approaches just being obsessed with the subject. There was various property money-making things that I looked into at the time: rent to rent, buy-to-let investing, flipping properties, buy, refurbish, refinance, rent, all of these random techniques that people try to teach on YouTube. To be honest with you, it gave me some form of basis of understanding how property works in general. At that point, I started to look specifically into agency because it was a career that I thought would work well for me. I'm not stuck behind a desk all day, you're out meeting people and still dealing with big capital transactions. And so it was a perfect blend of everything for me, and I started becoming obsessed with the subject. So I researched the best agents in the world. You know, most of them are in America because they put themselves out there. Ryan Serhant, Frederick Eklund, and all of the guys in LA as well, Jason Oppenheim, Josh Altman. So these are things that you need to look into, see how these guys operate, see what their day-to-day is like, and decide in your head whether being a property agent or advisor is something that you want to get into. Once you've done that, narrow it down a bit, look into the area that you're wanting to operate in, whether that's London or somewhere else in the UK, and look at the best agents in the area and see what they're selling. Get to know that market a little bit before you start speaking to people. So that's the best advice I can give as a first step. Become obsessed with property, look at other people that are doing well in the industry, and then start looking at the local market that you want to operate in. In my case, it was just London. I had like a broad idea of where I wanted to operate, and I didn't really know anything about London, but I saw a job opening in Kew in southwest London. So I started researching, Richmond, Kew, Putney, Wimbledon, that sort of patch of London, and just getting to know roughly what the prices were like and what was going on in the market, what was selling, what wasn't selling. And it gave me a nice foundation to then start having conversations with people in the industry, which is step 2. Step 2 is to start approaching people in the industry, applying for jobs and creating opportunities for yourself, creating meetings. It's all about meeting as many people as you can, and eventually opportunities will come from that. In my case, I saw a LinkedIn post on like a Sunday morning whilst I was still at school. I was studying my A-levels. I was 17 years old at the time. It was around sort of March, April 2021. I saw, because I'd already checked who the best firms are in London where I wanted to work, I'd connected with a lot of people on LinkedIn from those best firms, and one of them happened to be the head of recruitment at the firm that I then ended up going to. He posted something saying something like, "Call me if you want to get into property, great opportunities available at our company." And so I called him on a Sunday morning, expecting him not to pick up, and just as sort of did it on a whim. I tend to do things quite irrationally and on a whim. And I did it, and lo and behold, he picks up and we start talking, and he tries to tell me that, I'm too young, I live too far away, and that I couldn't become an agent straight off the bat. But because I'd done my research on how to be a good agent, what properties are selling for, and various other property related things, I started just splurging that information out at him. And by the end of the call, he was actually like, okay, this guy has a good basic understanding of what we're doing here. Maybe someone will give him a look. And we went from, no, you're too young, we're going to put you in the property services team, which is basically like a call centre, to let me have a chat with the directors and see if potentially there's an opportunity there for you. I then get a call 2 days later to say, great news, I've secured you an interview with one of our offices. This office was in Kew, which is where the job opening was, and the two directors there, Daniel and Amy, would be delighted to meet with you. This was coming out of COVID, so we actually did the initial interview on Zoom. So I remember rushing, I was at school the day the interview was, I was rushing home in the middle of school to put on a suit and tie to sit on Zoom and do this Zoom interview. And well, one thing led to another, and I ended up getting the job. But I only got the job because I prepared like nobody else has ever prepared for an interview, for that interview. And this is where this book comes in, and this is where we go on to step 3. So step 1, get to know stuff. That's what got me quite advanced into step 2. Step 2, start speaking to people, pick the phone up, call people, apply for jobs, and use what you learnt in step 1, which is a basic understanding of where you want to work, the property values, etc., to then impress the individual that you're speaking to in step 2. Once you've done that, step 3 is when you get through, you punch through to the meeting, to the interview, which in my case was with 2 directors at this firm. And to prepare for step 3, I used this book and I wrote a lot of things down in here, and ultimately it got me this dream career that I'm doing now. So this is what it looks like. I'm going to show you as much as I can. I ended up actually reaching out as soon as I got the interview and I was told who I'm doing the interview with, Daniel and Amy. I reached out to lots of employees at this firm and asked them, what are Dan and Amy like? You know, what do they like? And so I wanted to understand who I'm meeting and what they're going to enjoy. And so I was armed with all of that information going into the interview, knowing that if I said the right things, I could ace it. So I've got a section here in the book called Tips for Employees from Employees, because at the time I was speaking to the employees of this firm. And you can see point 1 here is, main thing for Amy and Dan is energy. And I've underlined that because I remember speaking to the girl at the time that worked at Chesterton's, Ray, and she said to me that Amy and Dan are obsessed with good energy. Again, it's something so simple, but I wouldn't have known to be all upright and live and bright if she hadn't told me that. Point number 2, don't pretend to be perfect, we're all learning. And that was something that I remember now in the interview that I said to these guys, you know, I'm not perfect, but I certainly would like to learn, and this is what I want to learn, and hopefully together we can learn this. If I went into the interview and just started blabbing on about how great I am and how I know everything, they probably wouldn't have liked me as much, and maybe I wouldn't have got the job. So it was so important to get the insight from the people that already worked there as to what would make Dan and Amy tick. And so Dan and Amy enjoyed the energy. They didn't want me to be perfect. And she said, get a good understanding of the background of the company, have a rough idea of what you want to get out of working at this company. And she actually gave me a really good tip here as well, point 6, which says, talk about how you're money motivated. This is a sales job at the end of the day, which is very, very important as well. You've got to, when you're applying for an agency job, talk to people about how hungry you are for money. Because at the end of the day, it's a commission-based role, and if you don't want to make money, you just want to float around and do things, you won't be as motivated to close deals as you should be, if that makes sense. So this was very interesting. And then I had another call with another guy called Tristan, who also worked at the firm at the time, and he again said to me that you've got to be obsessed with money, great person, ability to build lasting relationships, because that's what sales is all about, and do anything to do a deal, because you've got to be extremely hardworking. When you're starting as an agent, it's not glamorous. You've got to put in the work. You've got to put in 50 cold calls a day minimum, an incredible amount of hours per week. And so it was so good for me to get this insight from the people that already work there as to what I should say to the interviewers to make them like me and to make them tick. It was almost like a hack that I did at the time. And you've got to be confident. It says here, nervousness will ruin it. And I didn't know what I was doing. This was my first ever interview for a proper job ever in my life, like a full-time type thing. But I went into it with this level of confidence that I'd never had before, just because I knew that that's what I needed to do to secure the job. Inside, obviously, I was bricking it, but on the outside, I sort of did a fake it till you make it type attitude, and it helped out. Aside from actually speaking to the people that already worked there, finding out what the interview is like and then acting upon that. There's obviously other basic things that you need to know as well, such as history about the company and the facts and how the company is performing. If you're able to find performance-related information on a company and speak to the interviewers about how impressed you are with said performance, they will again have light bulbs going off in their head and saying, okay, this guy's actually interested in our company specifically and not just applying everywhere. I spoke to Dan and Amy at the time about how impressed I was with the company's results. And how did I know how the company was performing? I went onto LinkedIn and I found their London sales webinar, which is basically a webinar describing their performance. And then I just made bullet points. I made bullet points on the whole London sales webinar. Everything that they said, I then regurgitated in the interview. And I said to them how impressed I was with it. And again, that made a huge difference. And then I researched the CEO. That's another thing that you need to research. How the CEO got to where he is at the top of the company and how that was impressive to me. And so all of these things paired together, the research on the interviewers that I'm dealing with, the research on the company itself, and then the market surrounding it, were key data points and information points that I then used to close the interview. Obviously you have to be personable as well. I had something to talk about because at the time I was a football referee, and so I spoke to them about how I could deal with difficult people, which is often the case in a sales role, because I'd been a football referee for the past 3 to 4 years. If you have something like that, it's a huge advantage to you as well. And I remember at the time Daniel saying that a lot of his decision making was actually based on the fact that I had that experience with people, which is so important when going into a sales job like this. So all this research before the interview made me stand out massively. Now, when you're at the interview, these guys are going to ask you specific questions. So again, one of the things I did is I reached out to people that had previously got the jobs at this company, and I asked them, what are the interview questions? What are they going to ask you? And as you can see here, I have 2 big pages of potential interview questions. So I had every single possibility mapped out in terms of what they're going to ask me. I was extremely prepared for this interview. Every question that they asked me was on this list because I'd spoken to people in the industry and I knew what they're going to ask. So every question that they could potentially ask, I'd already revised an answer to, and I had something to say, which again was very useful because you don't want to be stuck in an interview when they ask you a question and you don't really know what to say, or you give a really weak response. So I had a strong response to absolutely everything because I had pre-planned it. I will probably make this available on the website at some point for you guys to have as well, in terms of a PDF with interview questions and answers, how I would answer them. I'll give you one just now. What do you have to offer? Such a simple interview question, but one that was actually asked me. And I said to them, a fresh canvas, a young mind ready to adapt to the insert company name way, heaps of energy and enthusiasm with a strong commitment to self-development as well as producing results. And so positioning yourself as a fresh canvas to this business is again something that's very useful because they can mold you to the way that they want you to work, and you can work within their culture. Some agents that have 2 or 3 years experience and say they were a crap firm just before they're applying to this new firm, they're stuck in their ways. They want to do things a certain way. They're going to be really, really hard to motivate and to craft the way that a new employee could potentially be crafted. So that was something that I honed in on massively. Being a fresh canvas, being taught the way they want me to work, was something that would benefit them massively. All of the research beforehand, as well as the preparation for the interview with the interview questions, meant that I aced the interview. If I do say so myself. Once you've aced the interview, it's important that you show them that you can close as well. And this is one of the best secrets that I can share with you, because this is exactly how I managed to get the job. And this is when I sort of knew that they would give me the job. I'd never walk away from any meeting without trying to have some form of close, be it subtle or completely out and out close. There's got to be some form of close at the end of every meeting, whether it's arranging another time to speak, agreeing next steps, or actually closing the deal. And when we finished the interview, they asked me if I had any questions, and obviously I'd asked some questions about the company, but then my last question to them was, is there anything that I have said today or part of my CV that would prevent you from hiring me for this role? It's a very, very direct question. Have I said anything today, or is there anything in my experience that would prevent you from hiring me for this role? Now, if they're considering you, they're not just going to say, yes, there is, because they don't want to, lose you. But they're also not going to say, no, there isn't, because then that means that, they're going to give you the role. So it was almost like a poker moment for a little bit, because I asked the question and it went quiet for a little bit, and we all sort of smiled at each other. And at that point, Amy, she didn't want to play poker. She said, no, there isn't actually. We think you're great, so we'll be in touch tomorrow. And we ended the call on a real positive because of that question that I asked. It was a very direct question, basically to say, are you going to hire me or not? There was no fugazi at the end, oh yeah, we'll reach out, maybe we'll go for a second interview 4 weeks from now, we might talk about it. I said, is there anything that I've said or anything that you've seen on my CV that would stop you from hiring me for this role? The answer is no. Great. Where do I sign? How do we do this? So it was a really nice close, and it's what ultimately allowed me to get the job offer the next day. This was now in April. I joined the company when I was 17 years old, and I was the youngest ever sales negotiator to be hired at the company, straight into a billing position. And I started at the end of June, 2 months after that interview, because they waited for me to finish school. And this was with no prior property experience, no connections in London, nothing. I packed my bags in Kent, which is where I lived, and moved to London by myself. I had no friends there, no family, lived in someone's room, a spare room for a long time, and just started grinding it out. I worked every single day. It was my passion. It still is to this day. And I made things happen. And I became the highest billing negotiator in the Southwest region in the office that I started at. Then I did extremely well in the Central region as well, and became the highest billing negotiator there. And then I quit and started my own business. But it all came from this initial hunt for a job, the initial interview, the initial opportunity, which then allowed for everything else to happen. So this is the most important part of the journey: how you start, where you start. I'm very grateful to have been able to do that. So, with that being said, thanks for watching. Make sure you check out the new website, like, subscribe for the YouTube algorithm, and I'll see you next time.